Hello, my name is Ernesto, and today I wanted to talk about the DC Finest books that I have, why I have them, why I like the format so much, and maybe what I'm looking forward to in the future with this line. So, if you're unaware, the DC Finest line is a format that came out about a year ago as I'm filming this from DC, and it's basically a character or event or team that's being chronicled throughout its entire history and put out in this format, which is called DC Finest. So they're mapping out, say, a character like Batman from his very beginning up to, it seems, the year 2011, which is when the universe reset with New 52. So I've been enjoying collecting these and checking several of these books out, having a lot of fun reading these stories that I don't think I would have read or come across any other way if I was just picking up these stories individually. So the first one I started with was this one, Batman Year 1 and 2. I got this about a year ago, and this collects Batman from 1986 to 1987. These are the Batman stories after Crisis on Infinite Earths, which reboot the DC Universe in the mid-80s. So this starts off with several issues, which is technically the beginning of his After Crisis run. However, as I understand it, Batman was one of the few characters, or maybe the only character, who had basically just a continuation of his pre-Crisis stuff. He didn't really change in tone. It took a while for his character and the way that they made these stories like change from the way it was in the Bronze Age, going into, I guess, what is considered the modern age after Crisis on Infinite Earths. So some of these stories, like in both the Batman line and Detective Comics line, are like a little like quippy, cheap or like unfunny one-liners and stuff from Batman or Robin. But there are other stories that are like super serious. So the first issue starts with a murder, which I find really interesting. It's a character that features Magpie in it. But the real selling point of this book is that it collects Year 1 by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli in its original colors. And this story is kind of known as the quintessential starting point for Batman. And I was doing some like jumping around in this book while reading it, but then when I came across this story, it's just really interesting to see from a historical context how different Year 1 is to everything else coming out for Batman around this time. It makes it feel even more like makes it feel even more of like a grand, like, wow, this is something groundbreaking. There's also Year 2 in this, which was supposed to be the follow-up to Year 1. Has since been retconned, as I understand it. And I can see why there are things about that story that are kind of like, I guess, just don't match the rest of Batman's mythos, especially his heavy use of a gun in that story. But I still had fun with the story for what it was in and of itself. I still enjoyed it and thought it was really good. So that's what I mean about, like, I wouldn't have read Year 2 if I didn't read it or check it out in this book. This also has the introduction of Jason Todd after his pre-Crisis introduction and, that whole thing. And so this is followed up in another volume. Whoops. Dropped Batman's Batarang. Okay, so I have several more DC Finest here that I have, and I'm just going to go through several points on why I picked it up and why I like it. So this is Superman the First Superhero. This, along with Batman Year 1 and 2, was one of the first DC Finest volumes to come out. So this collects Superman's introduction. This collects the Action Comics and Superman line from 1938 to 1940. So this is the very, very beginning of all of this stuff, which is really entertaining to read through. I've heard a lot of things about, like, people who don't quite like reading Golden Age stuff. Other people suggest that reading it just like one issue at a time, the way it sort of was meant to be, like, you know, out of a newspaper or comic strip or something like that, is the best way to digest Golden Age stories. But I enjoy, honestly, how silly they are. They're very fast paced, you know, things happen within like a panel that like, it just feels like we, you know, skipped a lot of time. But the stories are, I mean, honestly, the stories kind of range between like Superman stopping a war in a different part of the world to Superman impersonating a college football player to stop like a corrupt coach from paying others to like ruin the other team and that kind of thing. The stakes sort of flip-flop, but it's still really enjoyable nonetheless. So I really like the way that this looks on this page, the way that the colors look. They just really, really pop on here. And yeah, I'm enjoying this as a you know, a here and there kind of read in between the more like intense reads that I'm having for many of these. All right, I'll put this here. Next up is Wonder Woman, Origins and Omens. This was the third book, I believe, that came out when this line launched. This collects a bunch of modern Wonder Woman between 2007 and 2009. This collects a lot of Gail Simone's run on Wonder Woman. And this book, I really, really enjoyed because one of my things when I was getting into comics was I wanted to learn more about characters that I had heard a lot about, like Wonder Woman, but didn't really know. And so this starts off with a story called The Circle, which is very compelling and very interesting, and then just goes through Diana's adventures. And yeah, it's a really, really good run. And I look forward to checking out the next one. I'll talk about that a little later though. But I did find that this was a really cool intro to Wonder Woman and getting able to read like a more complete run. Now the next Wonder Woman volume I have is called The Legend of Wonder Woman. This collects Wonder Woman between 1983 and 1986. This is basically Wonder Woman before her reset and after Crisis on Infinite Earths. And this book I picked up because the art really struck me. I really the cover of this doesn't quite represent the majority of what's in this book. The last couple of stories in here are in that sort of Golden Age style. And that's because for Wonder Woman's last few issues before she was going to be reset, this was an homage to her early days from the 1940s. So that's why it's drawn this way. However, the majority of the book is just the way that Wonder Woman was being drawn in the early 80s. So it's very dynamic, is very just really great art throughout this. And I read several of the first issues digitally, and then I decided I was really into the story, so I picked up the DC Finest. So I look forward to diving more into this one later. Now this is Green Arrow, The Longbow Hunters. For now, the time being, only Green Arrow DC Finest that's out. I read through this. This collects Green Arrow from 1987 to 1988. There are a few like other lines in here, like The Question, where Green Arrow makes an appearance, and it collects like an issue or two even before Green Arrow comes in so that you can get the full story. And this book, really dark, not for kids at all, very serious, very like the themes are incredibly heavy, and there's some graphic imagery throughout this. However, the story I found very intriguing, very fascinating. The artwork I'm not going to show you that panel because it's very graphic. The artwork throughout the Longbow Hunters story is very, very cool, very interesting, and I found myself just incredibly engrossed in the story. And the follow-up for this is also being solicited for the future. This is my newest pickup, The Flash, the Human Thunderbolt. This collects the Flash between 1956 and 1961. This is significant for a few reasons. Firstly, this is the introduction to the modern version of the Flash that we know and love today. Before this version of the Flash was a member of the JSA, and Jay Garrick was who he was. But this is our introduction to Barry Allen, and this specific first issue is significant because it is credited as being the first issue or the launch of the Silver Age of comics, which utilized more science fiction and fantastical elements and blended them together. And so this is my newest pickup. Haven't dived deep into this yet. I really look forward to doing so. I have never checked out any Silver Age books before, so I look forward to checking this out. Now, lastly here is the book that I'm currently actively reading through, and this is Batman, The Killing Joke, and Other Stories. This is supposed to be the follow-up to Batman Year 1 and 2. So this picks up where this one leaves off and collects Batman 1987 up to 1988. And this has obviously The Killing Joke. And then the Other Stories things includes stories like The Son of the Demon, which is the story that I'm currently in while reading through this. You can definitely see the progression of the character and the way that Batman is written through the early stories of this volume into the stories of this volume, because the mainline Batman storyline, the Batman The New Adventures, is way more serious than the Batman series before this. Detective Comics does feel a little bit more, like there are more hokey one-liners and like really odd storylines. Like this Detective Comics story featuring Two-Face was just much more silly, and I wasn't expecting that coming from the previous issue in this, which is just more intense, and it's Batman really trying to like figure out and solve a crime, and there's a mystery going on. You're trying to figure that out with him, and it's just super intriguing. So another example of like, if I had just picked up The Killing Joke, which I hear a lot about, people are like, oh, get Batman Year 1 and then get The Killing Joke and then get, whatever else is next. But what I enjoy about collecting the DC Finest books are that they are collecting everything concerning the character chronologically as it was published through time. And I wouldn't have read any of these other stories otherwise. Even The Son of the Demon, which I am loving, is so great. I hear a lot about, but I wouldn't have picked that up because I don't hear enough about that storyline specifically. So I really love the DC Finest line for that reason specifically, and why I look forward to picking up more. So in that vein, I wanted to talk about the DC Finest books that I am looking forward to that are out currently, and then I'm going to describe the DC Finests that I'm looking forward to that have already been announced. As far as I hear, it seems like there's going to be an announcement for several more soon, and maybe I'll make another video to talk about those and what I think. But for the time being, I'm just going to talk about what like is out now that I want to pick up, is coming soon that I want to pick up, and then maybe what I'd like to see sooner rather than later in the line. So the first one that I want to pick up that is out already and has been for a while is Teen Titans, the Judas Contract. That I know is an important storyline and a very famous one for the Teen Titans that came out in the 80s. I think the only reason I haven't picked it up is because I did ask in the Facebook group what people thought about picking up that volume. And there was one chap who responded and said that the storyline is very good, but in terms of the new Teen Titans, which is what that is collecting, there should be about 3 books before the Judas Contract that I could read if I wanted to get to know the characters first before I got to the Judas Contract story. And I thought, I think I'd like to read it in that way. So it's on my list to pick up, but not a priority for me to pick up right now because I kind of do want to wait for those prior Teen Titans stories to read first before I get to the Judas Contract. So if I do end up getting it soon, then it'll just sit on my bookshelf for a while. There's no rush for me to pick that one up. Next would be Catwoman Lifelines. That one wasn't even on my radar. I had seen some like differing things between people on like the quality of that. But then I had heard that it collects several things, including Catwoman's perspective from the year one story. And that really intrigued me. And I had heard great things about the art and some of the like mainline Catwoman stories themselves are really interesting. So I thought, okay, I'll check that out. So it's on my list to get. Currently not in my possession though. Next is Team Ups, and the name of that one is like Race to the End of Time or something like that. That book just intrigued me in terms of its art and its story. So the Team Ups line, I guess for that volume specifically, collects DC Comics Presents, which apparently was the line where Superman teamed up with different heroes. And then it also collects Brave and the Bold, which is the line where Batman teams up with different heroes. So it doesn't seem like it's collecting World's Finest, where Superman and Batman team up themselves. It seems like that'll probably be its own line, which makes sense, I think. But the Team Ups line, those team up stories for both of those lines just really intrigued me with its art, and seeing walkthroughs of that seemed really cool. So that one's on my list as well. And then the last one that is out already that I have an interest in is Plastic Man, The Origin of Plastic Man. And that's a character I really know nothing about, and is another collection of Golden Age stories from when that character was introduced. But I heard that the collection of stories feels really quite modern and just so ahead of its time. And I saw some of the art in there. It seems really delightful. So that one I want to pick up. Okay, so that's what's out right now that I don't have that I would like to have on my shelf. But I'm going to talk about what's already been solicited and what's coming out soon that I have my eyes on and definitely am going to pick up when they come out. Okay, so I have a list pulled up of all of the DC Finest books that are coming out in the next several months. So I was considering maybe checking out Batman, The Case of the Chemical Syndicate, and that collects the earliest Batman stories from the late 1930s into the 40s, I believe, but I'm not completely sure, so that one is up in the air. However, the one I am definitely interested in is the follow-up to the Green Arrow Longbow Hunters volume, and that's called Green Arrow, The Trial of Oliver Queen. So that picks up where this one leaves off. That's a definite must-buy for me because that continues the story and I want to see where it continues going from there. Next one that's a definite must-buy for me is Superman, Time and Time Again. This collects Superman, I believe, from the early 90s, maybe late 80s. And this, as far as I know, collects Superman from the beginning of what's known as the Triangle Era. And the Triangle Era is basically across the 3 or 4 Superman lines that were running at the time. They all actually combine into one story that's being told chronologically. And the way that they would note that for the reader is that there was a triangle on the cover of each one with a number. And then you just read in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And you would get the complete story. So this is also the story that has the event of the death of Superman and then the return of Superman and everything like after this point. And this is sort of when that begins. So I look forward to picking this up and reading some more Superman stories. I love Superman. He's my favorite DC character. So I want to just read his mainline stories. One that I'm not certain I'm going to get, but I am interested in, is Justice League of America, Starro the Conqueror. As far as I know, this is the introduction of the Justice League. and the first Justice League stories. This was after characters like Green Lantern and the Flash were reintroduced and rebooted in the Silver Age. So that one seems interesting. I need to know a little bit more about the stories collected in there to see if the stories might be something that's up my alley. Next is Batman: A Death in the Family. This is the follow-up to Batman: The Killing Joke and Other Stories. So I know that storyline specifically, A Death in the Family, is very important to Batman's mythos. But just like the other DC Finest, I look forward to seeing what else in between is a part of that story as well. So that one is a definite pickup. Next is Wonder Woman: Dawn Before Darkness. This is the follow-up to the Origins and Omens volume. I think this collects Wonder Woman from 2009 to 2010, or maybe even up to 2011. So as a fan of this initial volume, I really am looking forward to the follow-up. So that one is definitely on my list. And then the last one that I am interested in is Green Lantern: Hard Traveling Heroes. I've heard a lot about that story. I've been wanting to pick up Green Lantern. I don't have anything Green Lantern, but his character and that whole mythos is so interesting and intriguing to me that I really, really want to check those out. But for now, I don't have anything. So I look forward to that and coming out and picking that one up. That's the storyline that features Green Lantern and Green Arrow. And those stories take place or came out in the 70s. And from what I understand, those stories were just really, really instrumental for comics in general and changed things going forward for the medium. So all of that is super interesting to me. So in terms of what hasn't been announced or out yet that I'd really like to check out, as someone still new to comics, I'd really like some of those post-crisis introductions to come out. I know most of that is collected heavily and a bunch of people have it. And so DC Finest is a great opportunity to collect stories that haven't been collected or published in other formats. And I admire it for that. But selfishly, I really want stories that I could easily get. However, I want them in DC Finest format. So that includes the Superman Man of Steel, I think, story is his reintroduction after Crisis on Infinite Earths in the 80s. And I'd really like to have that in DC Finest. I think it would take a few to collect all of that, but I'd really be interested in checking that out. The George Perez run of Wonder Woman, her reintroduction after Crisis. Again, I have never read those stories. I know they're collected in omnibuses, and I'm sure they're in trade paperbacks too, but the DC Finest format, I'd really love to have them to follow up this one, which collects Wonder Woman up to 1986. I want to check that out after that. So I want that soon. I'd really like... I was going back and forth with myself on what to collect in this format or a different format. And one of those was the Jeff Johns run on Green Lantern. And so I've kind of made the decision that I'm going to get the first volume omnibus of the Jeff Johns Green Lantern run, which I've read a little bit of, but it just... that whole thing I really want to dive into and get into. So if it's not going to be announced soon in DC Finest, I'm going to pick that up in omnibus form. If it does come out soon, then yeah, maybe I'll wait for the DC Finest format of that and just grow my Green Lantern collection through that. But that's one that I have a ton of interest in. I'd love to read The Flash after Crisis. His reintroduction, I think it follows Wally West and not Barry Allen, because I think he dies during Crisis or something like that. If that's a spoiler, sorry, but I'm not certain. So I'd really like to check that out and the Mark Waid run and all of that stuff, Jeff Johns run on The Flash, all this stuff you hear a lot about. I'd really like to check that out, but I'd like to have that in DC Finest format, I think, to join the Human Thunderbolt volume I have here that collects him from the Silver Age. I think it'd be cool to have some Aquaman volumes. That one, there's one out already that doesn't interest me. But I think if they collected the Peter David run from the 90s, I'd really be into that, and I'd want to pick that up for Aquaman. More of those Teen Titans volumes before the Judas Contract so that I can read that and have like a full, complete experience. I think that'd be really, really great. So yeah, I think that's what I've got so far. I'd really be interested in discovering more in the world of DC and getting to know new characters and other characters that appear in these maybe more popular characters that I pick up. And that seems to be the sort of like the path for most people, is discovering one character through a different character and getting into that way. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you can see why I like the DC Finest volume so much. Let me know if you collect DC Finest, what you've collected so far, what you're looking forward to in the future. I feel pretty lucky to have started collecting at the same time that these came out, because I get to hit the ground floor with collecting what interests me and not having to worry about them going out of print, because I'm sure several of these will be out of print in a few years, because there are already like over almost 50 of these DC Finest volumes that have come out in just about a year. And there's a ton more that's being solicited. And apparently there's several more after what's already been announced that will be announced soon or at some point in time, relatively soon. So the line isn't slowing down for the time being. So I hope with this momentum it can stay alive. And I'm going to be one of those that sticks with it. So thanks so very much for watching, and as always, take care.